All right, so here is the deal. Though sometimes life throws you into a scenario where you have no option but to take matters into your own hands, I never imagined I would be that person, the one to go nuclear on their own family. It all began a few years back, when I was 22 and working a dead-end grocery job to make ends meet while I worked on my degree. Tom and Linda, my parents, were, regarding their expectations of my life, let's just say, intense. Their ideal of how I should live, what I should study, and how I would be a model kid who never strayed from the path seemed great. One night I was seated at the dinner table with them. Every day was a lecture, an opinion I did not ask for, and a reminder that, to them, my existence was only an extension of their own. It was just another typical Thursday, and I was staring at my mom's rendition of meatloaf, tough as leather but tasting nothing. Although I anticipated we would once more have the dreaded future chat, it did not make any difference. Indeed, my dad begins with his customary fake concerned voice. "How's that business degree doing?" My gut collapsed. Though I had been postponing it for some time, it was time to tell them the truth. My heart thumping in my chest, I set down my fork and stared at my plate. Trying to keep my voice steady, I continued, I've been thinking about switching majors." The room went dead quiet. My dad seemed to be the same. I had just told him I wanted to flee and join the circus. "Switching subjects?" His voice tinged with disappointment as he asked. The response from my mother was even more negative. Her standard disapproving laugh seemed to fit everything about my life as a comedy. With a tight and condescending smirk, "Jake, thinking's never been your strong suit," she added. She was constantly jabbing veiled in jokes, but this time it struck differently. I finally stated, resisting the impulse to just walk out, "I want to switch to computer science." I didn't respond. I just swallowed back my frustration. Still, my dad threw his fork down, rattling the plates before I could even start to speak. "Computer science?" asked. "Out of your mind, are you? Money finds its home in business." He went above that as well. I was only their project, hence any indication of autonomy was interpreted as revolt. I slammed the door shut and just laid there, feeling the weight of it all, when at last I got away and headed up to my room. I disappeared from their sight. I needed to scream, so I contacted Ashley, my girlfriend, the only person who really understood what I was going through. I was not their kid. I was just a concept of who they felt I should be. She knew as soon as she picked up. "How would that go? Like a freaking disaster," I said, massaging my eyes gently. She sighed, empathetic but stern. I told them, and they behaved as I had just announced I was dropping out to be a street performer. "Jake, you really have to defend yourself. This is your life, not theirs." I knew she was correct, but facing down my parents seemed daunting. "I know, but my folks are involved here. Not that simple," I said, staring up at the ceiling. "Jake, you're 22. You live in an adult state. You have to start living for yourself. Otherwise, they will continue to govern your life." Her voice was steady, but gentle. She was right, and I knew it. I woke up the following morning with that advice running through my head. I had to stick to my values, even if it meant running the danger of everything. What, after all, was the substitute? Another 10 years allowing them to make my decisions? Not yes. I discovered them in the living room watching TV and realized it was now or never. I was not going to let them determine my life anymore. "Mom, Dad, I've decided," I said, voice unsteady but firm. Both of them looked up, and I could tell they understood I wouldn't be backing down. I am now studying computer science. That's what I wanted. My dad clenched his jaw and reddened his face. He shot back, "No, you're not." Then I responded, standing my ground for what felt like the first time in my life. "I'm an adult, and this is my decision." I thought maybe they would see my resolution and back down, but instead my mom got up and crossed her arms. "If you are such an adult, then you can support yourself," she remarked coldly. "You have 24 hours to pack and leave." I just gazed at her, too startled to move. You can't be serious," my dad responded, his voice low and threatening. "Oh, we're serious. You want to make your own decisions? Excellent. But you'll do it on your own." I don't even recall how I got back to my room, just that the treachery sunk in like a weight I couldn't get off. They were prepared to toss me over a change of major, over the fact that I wanted to make my own decisions. I called Mike, my best friend, unable to keep it together. It was as though they had just been waiting for a justification. "Dude, they booted me out." My voice quivering, I continued, "I have no idea what to do." He said without skipping a beat, "Pack your stuff, man. You are staying with me." With that, I packed whatever basics I could squeeze into a duffel bag. Walking out of that house was strange, like though I were observing it happen to another person. Still, a part of me sensed a tiny sliver of relief, even as hurt as I was. I was free, sort of free, though I had no idea what that meant or where it would lead. At least for the first time, I was in charge of my life. The days following expulsion were a haze. Crashing on Mike's couch, I was trying to decide what the hell to do next. Though it smelled like stale pizza and exercise socks and his flat was small, it was better than living on the street, and I had my best buddy there to help me keep sane. Though the reality was terrible, I was glad. I tried to concentrate on school, but it was practically impossible. I had little savings and would not continue long without some miracle. The hurt and wrath would sneak in every time I sat down to study, reminding me I no longer owned a house. Also, swiftly running out was money. Let alone anything else, my part-time employment hardly paid for groceries. Ashley persisted in checking in, either dropping off her extra food or bringing me deli sandwiches. She kept me grounded, but even she couldn't undo the catastrophe my life had turned into. One afternoon, she took me out for lunch to help clear my thoughts. "So, how are you doing?" she questioned, a sympathetic look in her eyes. I shrugged, pushing my food about my plate. "Actually, not really good." "You're doing the best you can, Jake," she replied, giving my hand a squeeze. "My money's almost gone. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up." "This marks not the end of the earth. It's only a large road bump." "Yeah," I answered with a sour laugh. "A bump the size of a mountain." We completed our meal, and she advised me to press on, saying I would figure it out. But I was losing hope as the reality started to show. I returned to Mike's following lunch and tried to concentrate on homework, but it felt useless. A few weeks went by, and things just grew worse. My grades were sliding, and I couldn't get rid of the sensation that I was falling out of control. I was barely making it. My financial account struck bottom, like a black cloud hovering over me everywhere. Though I wasn't ready to drop out, I couldn't afford education anymore, and the thought of staying in school simply seemed like a fantasy. I had to decide. The day I formally left seemed to be rock bottom. Feeling as though I had simply thrown away what I had worked for, I signed the form while seated in the dean's office. Dreaming of being the first person in my family to graduate from college, I felt totally confused when that dream started to fade. When I returned to Mike's that evening, I laid on the couch staring at my phone, trying to decide what to do next. Ashley always checked on me, so she phoned. "Right now, what is the plan?" she questioned softly, then let out a long sigh. "I have no idea. Though nothing is showing up, I have been hunting for more work. Every door is just closing in my face." She paused on the other end, and I could tell she was looking for words to reassure me. "You're not giving up, are you?" Feeling demoralized, I said, "I don't know what choice I have." "I dropped out today," she said, sounding sympathetic. "Oh, Jake," she whispered. She could not, however, alter the reality I was living. Following my college dropout, everything seemed to be disintegrating faster than I could manage. I had picked up a few more shifts at the grocery store, but it was hardly enough as I was still falling on Mike's couch. My savings vanished, and every day the fear of being flat broke crept in. One afternoon, while I was laboring away at the grocery store, Earl, my cranky manager, asked whether I wanted to pick up extra hours. I was tired, discouraged, and just barely hanging on. I first assumed he was simply stuffing more bad shifts, but then he mentioned a night security gig his friend was trying to cover. "Though it's not glitzy," he noted, "it pays better than this dump." Interested, I had no need to second guess. Certainly, I am in. I ended up working 2 jobs, flipping burgers and nightly guarding an empty office building with anything I could find. It was terrible, without a doubt. If I slept 4 hours a night, I was fortunate. My calendar turned into a never-ending cycle of non-stop shifts in which sleep was a luxury, and I was almost surviving off coffee. Still, I had no option. Ashley continued checking in on me, motivating me to push on even though I was beginning to feel as like I was simply treading water. I was on my own and had to make it work somehow. She would bring food, coffee, little mementos to tell me I wasn't alone in this every time she visited. Looking at me like she believed it. "You're doing amazing, Jake," she would add. I was not quite sure, though. One night, I was sitting in the empty office building watching at the flickering fluorescent lights. I was working 2 jobs, just scraping by, and felt as like I was losing myself in the grind. The emptiness was intolerable, and I began to question how my life had arrived at this. I had dreams, aspirations just months earlier, and now I was just surviving. The silence tormented me, and for a moment I questioned whether this was it, that which my existence would always be. Then, though, a tiny voice in the back of my head reminded me that it was not like this forever as I gazed out at the city lights. A few weeks went by and I continued to grind, keep pushing through every day one shift at a time. I could turn things around somehow. One day, a man walked in for lunch when I was working at the diner. Tired and worn out, he resembled everyone else, most likely engaged in some soul-sucking employment of his own. I never gave it much thought, but later on he noticed my open laptop behind the counter when he was making payments. Just attempting to keep my abilities sharp, I had been working on a coding exercise during my break and raised an eyebrow. "You into coding?" "A little curious," he asked. "Yeah," trying not to sound needy. "I've been instructing myself." Laughing, he said he hoped to work in it someday. "Well, entry-level IT men are sought for at my company." Not really believing what I was hearing, I blinked. Nothing special but a start. "Wait, seriously?" He nodded and passed me his business card. "Send your resume to me." I would say that my hands were shaking when I picked the card, as though I had just been given a lifeline. Sitting on Mike's couch that evening, I pulled together a CV while staring at my outdated laptop. It was not excellent, but it was all I had. Before I could start to doubt myself and then try not to raise expectations, I emailed it to the guy. Days went by and I never heard anything back. I assumed he had simply been courteous, not intending anything. However, my phone buzzed one of my night shifts. His firm sent an email inviting me for an interview. My heart pounding, I fixed my eyes on the screen. I borrowed one of Mike's excellent shirts the day of the interview and caught the bus across town, for the first time in months. Perhaps there was a way out of this. Though nothing showy, the company was a little startup, and to me it was a peak of something larger. The diner man, whose name I found out was Trevor, welcomed me and introduced me to Tina, his supervisor. Though I appreciated it, she was tough. All business. When she questioned me about my experience, I answered straightforwardly, "No degree, only some self-taught abilities and a lot of determination." Tina seemed not impressed, but she also wasn't dismissive. I fretted when she requested me to fix a coding issue right there. My hands shook as I typed, my head whirling. But as I went through it, I recalled all the evenings I had spent teaching myself, persevering through code problems simply to feel like I was headed forward. After completing the issue, I looked up and held my breath. Tina looked over and nodded at my answer. She said, "Okay, let's give him a shot," staring at Trevor. I almost couldn't believe it. I worked for someone. Starting at the IT work felt like entering a different planet. A real job. I was doing something I really cared about, not only living for once. Though the work was not glitzy, I didn't give a damn. It was a foot in the door, and I pushed myself into it to pick knowledge from all sides. Though Tina was a strict manager who refused to hold my hand, that's exactly what I needed. At first, I was still working the night security job, clinging to that last piece of revenue to make sure I didn't fall behind. She encouraged me to grow, to take on things I wasn't sure I could do, and each day I felt myself getting stronger, more capable. I ultimately, though, reached a breaking point. I knew I couldn't maintain managing both jobs. The tiredness was catching up to me. I so told Earl I was leaving when I came into his dining office. As the months passed, I began to feel more confident in the IT position. He grumbled something about me being a hard worker and wished me luck. Then I left that greasy job behind permanently. I was developing, learning, and for the first time, I could glimpse a future. It was about creating something real rather than about surviving now. Ashley observed it as well. Rather than grumbling about how awful my life was, I became eager to share with her my efforts, little victories, and lessons learned. One evening, following a demanding week, I was sitting on her couch, almost sleepy, and she looked over with a gentle grin. She always supports me. She whispered softly, "You know, I always knew you would get here. You're doing it, but your intended approach wasn't this one. You're making it happen." Hearing her say that, knowing she believed in me all along, hurt me harder than I anticipated. Without her, I never imagined myself here. "Thanks," I murmured, my voice caught. She laughed, dismissively saying, "I don't think I could have done it without you." "You would have found a way. You only needed a push." Perhaps she was right, but her encouragement made all the difference. Work started picking up, and I was taking on more responsibility, tackling bigger projects and proving myself to Tina and the team. It gave me the strength to keep going, to push through the self-doubt and the tiredness. She brought me into her office one day and handed me a folder, including a sizable fresh assignment. For the business, it was a major deal that might either make or ruin us. She wanted me to lead it, and I knew this was the chance I had been waiting for. Equal parts afraid and thrilled. I poured myself into the effort, working weekends and late evenings, doing all it took to ensure it ran without a hitch. Ashley was there through it all, reminding me to eat, bringing me coffee, and making sure I wouldn't burn out. The night before the major customer presentation, I hardly slept. I couldn't let her down or let myself down. My head was whirling over every detail. Though I felt the weight of all I had battled descending on me, I reminded myself that this far I had made it. I was ready. The performance exceeded my expectations. The customers were delighted, and Tina drew me aside later, a rare smile on her face. "You have done good work, Jake," she added. Walking out of that office, I felt a thrill of pride. "Keep this up. You will go far here." From rock bottom, I had pulled myself, battled every obstacle, and at last I was standing on solid ground. Ashley chuckled, pleased and proud, as I told her the news over the phone on her way home. I had finished it. One night, while browsing real estate listings, dreaming about what my future could look like, I came upon a familiar address and realized life still had one last surprise in store for me. I was not simply surviving. I was creating a life I could be proud of. My childhood residence, the place I had been kicked from. The house was put on sale. Heart thumping, I clicked on the listing and went over the details. The price was astonishingly low, much below market value. It was petty, maybe even a touch careless, but I couldn't get rid of the thought since the landlord seemed to want to sell fast. I was in a position to do it right now, and they knew nothing about my life or the degree of change I had undergone. This could be my opportunity to get back under control. The house was mine within weeks after I called my real estate agent and made an offer the next day. I owned the place I had been thrown out of just like that, and then the call came from the property manager. "The tenants want to meet the new owner," he noted. Knowing exactly what I would do next made me grin. Owning my childhood house felt strange. From collapsing on a friend's couch to serving as the landlord of the very property I was kicked out of, I had gone from, it felt as though everything had turned around, and now I carried all the cards. A few days after the sale closed, the property manager contacted me saying, "The tenants want to meet the new owner," sounding apathetic. I knew my parents had no idea it was me who had bought the house. This made me a little bit happy. While I advised him to arrange things in a laid-back manner, my mind was already running over the possible course of events for this confrontation. The day of the meeting arrived. This was more than just money or power. It was an opportunity to recover the dignity they had denied me when they had thrown me out without second thought. Arriving at the house late afternoon, parked out front, I took a long breath. The place seemed different somehow, smaller than I had remembered, as though all the years of bitterness had exaggerated its significance. My dad answered, rather perplexed at seeing a stranger. I walked up to the door, knocked hard, and waited. He was gray around the temples, somewhat older, but that same icy gaze I could too clearly recall. You came to see the landlord?" Glancing around, he inquired. He asked, and the smile pulled at the corners of my mouth. I said, confidently striding inside, "That's me. I bought the place." He blinked, startled, but before he could reply, my mother showed up in the hall. Her eyes widening in horror, she stopped dead when she spotted me. "Jake?" She hushed, obviously not expecting to find me in her living room. "What exactly are you doing here?" Leant against the wall, I crossed my arms. "Well, it turns out I am your new landlord." Their faces went white. Both of them were transfixed, trying to make sense of the reality that the child they had kicked out without thinking twice was now the leaseholder. After a few uncomfortable silence beats, I decided to cut straight to the point. It was a moment I had considered for so long, but standing there, I felt an unusual mix of triumph and emptiness. Looking both dead in the eyes, I said, "Let's talk about the rent." "Starting next month? It's tripling." My dad's jaw fell and his face flushed a hue I hadn't seen in years. "Triple?" he stammered, fury boiling under the shock. "You cannot be taken seriously, Jake." Calm as always. "Oh, I'm dead serious," I said. "Property values have rise. I have to be sure my investment is yielding a reasonable return. You are free to stay, but it will cost a lot more." I observed both of them, maintaining a calm demeanor. My mom, clearly disturbed, tried to reason with me. "Jake, please. You know we can't afford that." My words weighed enough. "You don't have to yell. You know our predicament." I nodded, feeling a pang of something almost like remorse but pushing it down. Her voice broke slightly, the way it often did when she sought to tug at someone's sympathies. Keeping my voice strong, "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You can either locate somewhere else or pay the new rent." It felt harsh, but I knew if I softened even a bit, they would be all over it, attempting to control me back into the compliant child they believed I was. They had to see that I was different today, that I was someone they could not control. The room was tense, and I could see them both scurrying, looking for a way out. But there was none. I had constructed a life without them, had learned to survive on my own, and now was my opportunity to show them. I told them I would give them some time to consider it, and left following a few minutes of awkward silence. Knowing they couldn't do anything to improve the circumstances, I felt a weird mix of triumph and sadness as I left that house. Though it felt different from the Win I had always envisioned, I had done what I had set out to do. It felt hollow. The next 3 days were slower than I had anticipated. Though part of me anticipated they would call me, try to renegotiate, or talk me down, they did not. Perhaps they understood I would not move. In either case, I began to question if I had indeed made the correct decision. About a week later, I got a call from the property manager once more. Sure, I had demonstrated my independence and wrote a note saying I was not someone they could walk all over, but it felt like I had opened an old sore rather than healed it. "They have decided to move out," he remarked, sounding not surprised. Hearing it out loud, I felt less the gratification I expected. The new rent seemed excessive for them. Yes, I had seized control, but overall the item tasted terrible. Figuring I would find new renters soon enough, I advised the property manager to start managing the changeover. It was business, as Tina always said, and I had to maintain it that way if I wanted it to eat me up. A few days after they left, I returned to the house to make a walkthrough to observe what required repairs. Memories flooded back as I walked through those rooms, not all of them negative. I thought of family dinners, Christmas mornings, and the small things that had once made this house unique. Then the darker memories surfaced, the arguments, the lectures, the looks of disappointment each time I fell short. I completed the inspection, noted a few things that needed repairs, and went as fast as I could, feeling as though the walls themselves carried both parts of my past, and I could not get away from them. Though I had assumed purchasing this house would provide closure, Ashley noticed something was amiss in the next few days. We were seated on her couch one evening when she eventually inquired, "Are you okay? You have been changed ever since you bought that house." I hesitated, not sure how to put it. "It just felt different than I expected," I said. I felt purchasing the house would bring me closure, but right now I'm simply caught with these memories. She stared at me carefully, her hand resting on mine as if I could forward. Sometimes the gratification you seek from retribution is not what it promises. Perhaps this had little to do with showing them your progress. Perhaps it was only about showing oneself. Her comments really struck me as accurate. Having been hunting this moment for so long, I thought it would bring things back to normal and perhaps ease the anguish I had carried since they kicked me out. Purchasing that house had simply brought everything back to the surface. It had not delivered the closure I yearned for. Over the next few days, I gave great thought to what Ashley had said. Perhaps it was time to give up trying to prove myself to folks who had never seen me for who I was. I had put much effort into building my life and producing something I could be pleased of. Perhaps that was plenty. At last, I decided to list the house once more. It seemed as if the only way to really let go. I didn't have to hang on to a place that had brought me so much suffering in order to make a point. A few months later, the house sold and I closed that chapter of my life permanently. The day I signed the listing papers, I felt lighter, like I was finally ready to go on for real. Honestly, I didn't give a damn about where my parents had disappeared to. This was not about them anymore. It addressed me personally. After that day, they kicked me out, so I let go of the bitterness, the desire for affirmation, and all the baggage I had carried. Life continued. Work increased up, and I began tackling additional tasks, pushing myself in ways I hadn't previously. I was not looking back, nor was the past or what my parents thought of me haunting me. Ashley and I started talking about our future, about perhaps purchasing a house together, constructing something really ours, and I was making my life for myself, on my own terms. It felt like I was finally free. I felt, for the first time, as though I were poised on solid footing, prepared to meet whatever life presented. I had no need of proving anything to anybody. I had survived, started a life, and discovered someone who embraced me for exactly who I was. And that was worth more than any old house or painful memory. Ultimately, I came to see that you may choose not to let the past define you, but cannot change it. I had let go of the rage, the urge for retribution, and the weight of my family's expectations. At last, I could lead my life the way I wanted. Having the house sold felt like I had at last closed a terrible chapter in my life. No more residual bitterness and no more desire to prove myself to people who had never actually seen me. My career was strong. I was free to look forward, and for the first time in a long time felt like I was headed towards something decent. People were beginning to notice as I kept advancing at work, picking on additional projects. Working with people that valued me, I was at a place I could be happy of. Starting my own business had been on my mind for a while, but now, with the extra money from selling the house, it felt like a real possibility. Starting my own firm was a lot harder than I had expected, and the beginning was nothing but long evenings and endless paperwork. But this time felt different. Every hour, every grain of effort I spent into it belonged to me. I was creating something I could be pleased of. I was not responding anyone. Things began to line up slowly. Clients arrived and the company expanded. Looking back on the battle to get here, it was almost surreal. Before I knew it, I was recruiting people, building a team, and really operating a company. There had been so many times when I felt I was done, and at last life had knocked me down. But now, standing here, I understood I had grown to be someone I hardly knew, stronger. The fearful youngster who had been thrown out with nowhere to go was no more. Ashley was with me through it all, supporting me from the sidelines, always there to listen when I had a tough day, or to remind me to take a break when I went too deep in the job. I was carving my own way, constructing a future, and I didn't need affirmation from anyone know I'd succeed. We decided to jump in after more and more we had been discussing our future, and with the stability I had at last. We combined our savings and purchased a house together, a place we could call our own, full of our own memories and free from the past, small though it was ideal for us. We would paint rooms, set up bookcases, and claim it on weekends. Building this life together seemed to have something about making all the challenges worthwhile. Every day I arrived home to find somewhere I felt appreciated, loved, and safe. One day, a few months after we moved into our new house, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. Everything I had hoped and more than I had ever anticipated. It came from my parents. Since the house incident, I hadn't heard from them. I assumed perhaps they would have just left it go. But here it was, a handwritten letter in the typical slanted manner of my mother. Uncertain whether I even wanted to read it, I sat at the kitchen table just staring at it for a bit until curiosity drove me open. The letter was, in one sense, contrite. My mother wrote about how they would have thought pushing me was helping me, not hurting me, and about how they lacked understanding of my decisions. She said she regretted how things had gone and that they wanted to reconnect if I was open to it. Part of me was still angry, still hurt, and I didn't know if I could ever totally forgive them. She did not exactly apologize for kicking me out. Another side of me, though, saw the letter as a step forward, an opportunity to reconstruct something, even if it wouldn't be flawless. I sat with it for a few days, unsure of what I wanted to do, or even what I would say should I decide to get in touch. Ashley, as always, listened gently as I worked through everything in my thoughts. "What do you think?" One night, feeling conflicted between the hurt and the potential of mending, I asked her. She grasped my hand, considerate as always. "Jake, you have made this decision. Maybe try it if reconnecting seems appropriate. You owe nothing to them, though. Simply keep in mind, whatever you choose, it has to be for you, not them." Her comments were precisely what I needed to hear. I didn't have to feel bad about wanting to defend myself. I didn't have to get into anything either. After spending a few more days seated on it, I decided to write back and let go at my own speed. Though I kept it honest, I did not open my heart. I shared with them my life right now, how I was doing, and how I had created something for myself, something I was proud of. I told them I wasn't bitter anymore, even though I didn't talk much about the past or go over old hurts. Weeks passed, and we exchanged a few more letters, then sporadic phone calls. I had moved on and was willing to start gradually if they wanted to reconnect. It was embarrassing, and although the same anguish occasionally returned, its intensity was less than it had been. Time had softened some of the edges. Even if I knew things would never be the same, I recognized I didn't need them to be. Forgiveness was not about them. For me personally, I had to let go to free myself from the disappointment and resentment. I had been carrying that weight for so long, and now I was ready to let it go. Ultimately, my parents and I arrived at a sort of peaceful understanding. They never really apologized, and I have come to terms with the likelihood that they never would. They valued the limits I set, though, and we managed to remain in touch without revisiting past hurts. Though unusual, it worked. My life kept developing and evolving. The business prospered. Ashley and I finally were engaged, then married in a little private ceremony attended by close friends. It felt appropriate, like if everything had at last come together. The day Ashley and I welcomed our first child was among the most significant events of my life. We were building a life full of love, respect, and understanding. Everything I had missed growing up, and everything I wanted to offer to our future family. Holding our son and staring down at this small, flawless human, I became quite clear about our goal. As time passed, I thought less and less about the hardships I had gone through. This was my chance to do things differently, to break the cycle, to build a life for my child, whereby they would feel loved and supported regardless of who they came out to be. Though they still lingered, the recollections lacked the ability to control me the way they previously had. One afternoon, I was sitting in our backyard observing my daughter play when my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. I had created something solid and enduring, a life full of people who really cared about me and loved me for who I was. She asked whether I wanted any of the pictures she had emailed of an old family album she had come onto. Though it was a straightforward message, I found great resonance in it. Looking at the photo, memories pouring back, I felt for the first time the familiar sting was absent. I took a long breath, grinning as I looked out over the life I had created, then typed back a reply. It was only a part of my past, a bit of a greater narrative leading me to where I was today. Sure, I'd love to have some. It was just a little moment, but in it I felt a peace I hadn't known was feasible. By creating a life stronger and greater than what I had left behind, I would have come full circle. Not by returning, but by onward movement. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to really go on is to forgive, not for anyone else's benefit, but for your own. This was my story now, molded by my decisions, fortitude, and the people who had really stood by me. And in doing this, I had at last discovered the freedom to lead a life totally, without apology, exactly mine.